Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
You're listening to Serious Privacy, powered by TrustArc. Here are your hosts, Paul Breitbart, Ralph O'Brien, and Dr. Kay Royal.
After many weeks of ping-pong on copyright protections when training large language models, the UK House of Commons and the House of Lords have finally adopted the Data Use and Access Bill, which should receive royal assent on the 19th of June. We'll take a look at the final text and what will be changing. Furthermore, news on TikTok, Pay or OK, and another appointment in Australia. My name is Paul Breitbart.
My name is Ralph O'Brien.
And I'm Kay Royal, and welcome to Serious Privacy. So that was a fun episode last week on global CBPRs. I'm still kind of recovering from how good that was. Unexpected question. What is your favorite number? Your lucky number?
That's a hard one.
I'm not sure whether that's something that I would be willing to share.
Yeah.
Ooh.
My favorite number's I.
The Roman I.
The impossible number. The square root of -1. How's that?
Are we supposed to say the answer to everything is 42?
44.1 with inflation.
My favorite is 13. I'm okay with that. Everybody else hates 13. They think it's unlucky, so I figure it's got good mood left over to spare. So I like 13.
Fair enough.
If I could change my last name to 13, I would. Yep. Unlike a former coworker who said I should change it, his last name was 9.
That was the one that was coming up to me as well, yeah.
The K9, yeah.
K9.
Would also be fitting.
And back to Dr. Who.
Yeah. I'm going to keep mine confidential. I'm sorry, Kay. But I use it in too many things.
See, I don't use mine in anything.
So, nope, I'm not going to share.
So his answer to everything is 9.
Nobody would ever use their birthday as part of a password.
Or their kid's birthday, or yeah.
Then add an exclamation mark after it, just to make it more secure.
Yes, we're at 1.123 exclamation mark. That works, right?
Exactly.
Exactly.
As long as your username is admin.
But you have to have a letter in there, so please, let's change the 3s to E's and the 0s to O's.
Yeah. Good password construction, that's a topic of its own, isn't it?
I think we've done it in the past, but
We've
I have
done
no
one.
idea what
we
episode
need to do
it was.
another. We did it with Tim, where we reviewed all the top passwords and misuses of passwords. We should probably do that again. That is true. So
The list hasn't changed, so
yes, I'm pretty sure Monkey is still there.
We're all in agreement there. And talking about agreement.
the Data Use and Access Bill. Lord What His Name gave up his resistance.
Lord, what's his name? Lord, what's her name?
Oh, Lady, what's her name?
Yes. It was Baroness Kidiron, but another one of the lords, the Holloway, I think, tried to bring it back after Lady Kidiron had said she wasn't going to reintroduce it yet again and yet again. And yes, the elected Parliament, the Commons, has indeed won, and presumably tomorrow, which is going to be the 19th of June, the Data Use and Access Bill becomes the Data Use and Access Act 2025 once it goes through royal assent.
DUAA, that's not an acronym that we're looking forward to use.
Yeah, though one of the opponents of copyright was actually the artist Dua Lipa. I've been calling it the Dua Lipa bill for some time anyway. So.
That works. On a side note, I do love her in her global tour right now. Wherever she performs, she's singing a song in the local language from a local artist. And I think that's absolutely amazing. And she does a terrific job doing it.
That's great. That's better than most. I went to see Guns N' Roses once, and I actually opened by saying hello to the wrong country. She knows where she is.
She does.
So just to remind everybody, because no doubt LinkedIn will go crazy about it, this is not a law that is as radical as its previous incarnations. And in the UK, the sort of the unholy trinity of the three primary underlying laws, the UK GDPR, the Data Protection Act 2018, and PECA 2003 still apply. They'll just look a bit different. What this law does is, rather than revolutionizes, it adds on amendments. So depending what you look at, which way you're looking at, it either eases sort of the burden on UK businesses, or it's death of rights by 1,000 small cuts. We'll see different opinions on that. Some of the law firms have already come out and said, oh, this means nothing. But I think there are some fundamental differences in here that organizations will definitely have to focus on. That will be a topic. I don't know if, Paul, if you've had a look, or Kay, you've had a look yet. What are your overall thoughts before I jump into the detail of what's changing?
I've had a look, but not at the final version that has now been adopted. So that I just haven't managed to read it in full. So I'm happy to listen to you taking us through it and asking my questions. And I guess the same applies for Kate.
Probably, because unless there's a recital 143 that really stands out, I probably couldn't quote any details to you right now.
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of things to note in that this isn't only a data protection law. There are a number of other parts to it as well. Part 1, access to customer and business data. Part 2, digital verification services. So this is about establishing identity online, which I know is all very close to our heart. We're going to have a digital verification services register, and people can apply to be on that, and people can be removed from that, presumably, if they don't agree. A national underground asset register, a map of where everything is underneath the ground.
Well, that's interesting. Has nothing to do with data protection, but it's interesting.
Yeah, there's some changes to our births and death registers as well. So this is a law that does a lot of different things, but it only gets to data protection in fact, part 5 out of 8. So part 5 and part 6 is the stuff that deals with data protection. And just to be triply clear here, it doesn't fundamentally change. The UK GDPR still applies, the Data Protection Act 2018 still applies, and PECR 2003, our own implementation of e-privacy, still applies. So nothing changes there. It is just that there is now little track changes and amendments and sub-clauses added in the whole way through. So the top changes, automated decision-making, perhaps the most significant divergence from the EU regime. It basically talks about that the prohibition on processing data solely by machines only applies to where it's based partially or entirely on special category data. So that's a real divergence in a way, that Article 22 really now focuses on special category data rather than on all personal data.
That's a slippery slope.
Isn't it? Yeah, I agree with that. Safeguards will still be there. Transparency, human review will still be required. It's just that the prohibition, he says, you shall not process data solely. So basically what they're saying is if you're going to be using AI, you're going to be using automated decision-making. If it involves special category data, you're going to need humans involved. If you're not using special category data, then, it's okay to do things with humans out of the loop.
So if it's just scrutinizing your financial data to see whether you can get a loan, that would be something that could be done without humans in the loop, even though it could still be discriminatory.
I agree, yes. I think that's perhaps the most significant change for me. Adequacy decisions changed from the EU definition of essential equivalence to not materially lower.
That's really interesting. That's the criticism that they face for being so U.S. friendly.
Yeah, and so this does pave the way for the UK to pass further adequacy decisions on our own. If we do and the EU doesn't, that presents an onward transfer risk, as we know. So far, since Brexit, we have kept our list the same as the EU's, right? I guess paving the way for just changing that standard from essential equivalence to not material lower, does pave the way for the UK to make adequacy decisions, perhaps on a slightly different standard than the EU. So again, adequacy might be a thing to consider if that does occur.
It also opens the way for a lot of semantic discussions in publications all over the internet and in legal journals.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, what does not material lower mean compared to essential equivalence? That's an interesting question. One I probably do agree with, actually, Pekka. In the UK, our e-privacy is capped at 500,000, which was the previous 98 Act cap. But that would raise to equivalent to GDPR levels. So potentially breach of cookie and marketing rules could lead to fines up to 17.5 million or 4% of global annual turnover. So will the regulator use that power to increase their fining numbers? Because I'm very vocal in my perhaps condemnation of the ICO for not using their enforcement powers for GDPR. To be fair to them, they actually do use them for PECR. There is actually a number of marketing penalties that the ICO does come out with. And I suspect that's in relation to its complaints. It's going to get far more complaints about somebody giving them, sending emails than they are about people holding on for data longer than necessary in international transfers.
Now, it says they have enhanced authority to enforce. What does that go up to? What does that meaningfully use?
Again, it's the fining cap that's changed from 500 to 1,000 to 17.5 million. There is something changing in the way that complaints has to happen. And I think that is going to be quite interesting as well, because the right of the data subjects to complain to the controller has always been enshrined in law. But the ICO's policy has always been, you must complain to the controller first, not to us. Now, under the GDPR, I think there's been cases that have gone through in Europe that have said you can complain straight to the regulator. You don't have to go to the controller first. Now, we've got new changes here under this law that says that you have to go to the controller first. The controller must facilitate the making of the complaint, such as with a form that can complete it electronically. And controllers must acknowledge complaints within 30 days and respond with it without undue delay. So I think that's an interesting one now. So presumably in the UK, we're now adding an extra step and we're saying you can't go straight to the ICO. You must go to the controller first. The controller must acknowledge the complaint within 30 days, respond without undue delay. And then it's if they don't respond then you go to the regulator. Practically, I think that's the way it was occurring anyway, because that was the ICO's policy, but that wasn't really supported by what the law says.
So there's an enforced 30-day cure period, essentially.
They must acknowledge it within 30 days. Yeah, that's interesting. Going back to Pekka for a second, our e-privacy law, there are some new exemptions for cookies. So cookies for statistical purposes. Yeah, cookies for statistical purposes, you again have to be transparent for an opt-out rather than opt-in. And cookies which sole purpose enable a website appearance to adapt, such as accessibility cookies, again, subject to transparency and an opt-out. We're just increasing that your strictly necessary definition under e-privacy to also cover statistical purposes, which to me means Google Analytics, potentially?
Possibly, but I do have a question on this one, Ralph.
Yeah.
So with the statistical or the analytical and the appearance cookies, there are companies that do, I hate to say experiments, and I caution them all to never call them experiments, that align with dark patterns. Do people click on this if it's blue versus if it's green? Do people like things in the upper right-hand corner versus the lower left-hand corner, which are all statistical, capturing the clicks and the counts, as well as appearance, capturing the placement and the color and the font? Doesn't that kind of antithesis of dark patterns?
Yeah, deceptive design practices have always been a concern. Can you truly consent if you have been tricked into something, or if the alternative is payment? We'll talk about pay or okay later. But have I truly consented if, the yes button is in bright green and massive and the no button is in grey and hidden in the corner? Yeah. I don't think this is that. This is basically saying, as we're looking at cookie types, At the moment, you would say strictly necessary, I've got to tell you about, but I don't need your consent for, right? Whereas anything else, statistical cookies or anything like that, or marketing cookies would be strictly opt-in under the under the e-privacy approach. Whereas now we're saying perhaps those statistical ones, the data analytics ones, become opt-out rather than opt-in. So you would have to be transparent, you would have to tell them, but the slider can be automatically set to in, whereas I think on the EU approach, it would be the other way around.
That's also not very business friendly. And that was the intent of this whole setup, that the legislation would become more business friendly. But by deviating in such a way from international standards, and especially from European standards, that also means that you put extra burden on companies to have your cookie banners set up in a different way with different geolocation setups.
Yeah, I think that's my problem with all this. I am worried that with messages from the ICO saying we're going to go easy on enforcement, with messages from the law saying we're going to make it all slightly easier for you, there will be a drop in compliance efforts in the UK. But I don't think it changes anything for your large international organizations. If you're a large international organization, you'll be subject to the GDPR from Europe anyway. There's nothing in this that actually directly conflicts too much with the way the GDPR works. It just provides you with limited and extra exemptions in the UK. So rather than an incompatibility, it's more of a softening, which means that companies that still want to keep their international standards high can. And that would be my encouragement to most of my clients. I would say, look, if you're dealing with anything outside the UK, keep doing it the way you're doing it. That would be my advice anyway. Whether they will or not, or whether they'll go, oh, we can do some extra things in the UK. We've got some carve-outs here. Let's use them. That's another question. That's another question. So the next one is subject access rights. Businesses are saying this is a welcome change, but I don't see it as a change, really. It says you only need to provide information in response to a data subject access request based on a reasonable and proportional search. I say that's the way you do it anyway. There's this view of the GDPR that you have to search every desk drawer. The GDPR doesn't say that. It says go to your systems of records in terms of manual data and then look for any data electronically. Mm-hmm. So, what is a reasonable and proportional search? That's an interesting question. And again, I think one that, will have to be determined in the courts. What is a reasonable and proportional search? And again, this is just a clarification of the current position. Again, the clock does not start until the controller has been able to confirm the data subject's identity, which if I was a lawyer, I would say that's a nice way I could introduce a delay into the process. But there we go. I actually saw a great presentation on a lawyer here called Ashley Winton, great guy. And he really did it from the point of view of, I'm going to wear my evil hat and moustache and say, what can I do in the law to introduce delay? What can I do as a lawyer in order to frustrate the subject access process? And I think here we've got another couple of things that could be used to frustrate or deny individuals' data. What is a reasonable and proportionate search is going to be a thing of some concern. It's also worth noting very quickly what isn't in here. In its former incarnations, the Data Protection Digital Information Bill, there was a lot of talk about getting rid of ROPAs, getting rid of DPAAs, getting rid of DPOs. That is not in this bill, which is good. So that's all gone. There is none of that. What is in this bill, and I think is the biggest change, is two things that I think will work together to really lower the standard of data protection. There is what they call recognized legitimate interests and compatible secondary purposes. Yeah. One of the most sort of vaunted aspects of the reform is the paperwork. You're going to have to do paperwork. Every time you say legitimate interests, you've got to do your balancing test. Now, what they've basically said is there are recognized legitimate interests. So disclosure for the purpose of public interest tasks, national security, public security and defense, responding to emergency, prevention, detection of crime, safeguarding of vulnerable individuals. These are all considered legitimate interests that don't need the test. Make of that what you will.
I guess for some it will be really useful.
Yeah.
I think to some extent it makes sense, right, that you have certain pre-approved legitimate interests, and that is not that much different from what the European Data Protection Board has done by, for example, saying fraud prevention could be considered as a pre-approved legitimate interest. You still need to look whether your implementation is legitimate, but they do give the clear indication, hey, these are things that in principle would be covered by a legitimate interest.
Yeah, and there's a very similar list for what they call compatible secondary purposes. Yeah, as we know in data protection, it's never only the primary purpose that trips you up. You get the data because you go into hospital because you've broken your arm. You expect the hospital to use your data for primary medical care. So, that's in line with your expectations. Where you get tripped up is secondary purposes. I'm now going to use it for marketing. I'm now going to use it to train my AI. I'm now going to use it to do all these things.
And we're not allowed to do that?
No. There is now a schedule in law that says here are a load of things that are treated to be compatible with the original purpose. So you've now got disclosure for the purposes of archiving the public interest, public security, emergencies, prevention of crime, protection of vital interests, safeguarding of vulnerable individuals, taxation, legal obligations, all things that are now going to consider to be a sort of compatible secondary purpose.
Some of them don't seem that bad, but others are indeed also, in my view, questionable. But at least I don't hear you saying things like a secondary purpose, like improving algorithms in a business-to-business relationship.
Or marketing,
all things like that. That's already a gain, I would say. You see so many companies who are now in a business-to-business context, so processors, who say, and we will also use the data that we receive from our data controllers to also train our own algorithms and use them for product improvement. That's impossible because that is a change of purpose that would require consent. And as a data controller, you are not able to give consent on behalf of the individuals whose personal data you have.
No, yeah. And again, I don't think safeguarding of vulnerable individuals, protection of vital interests, crime, emergencies, public security, these aren't, I would say actually...
Those are not the horrible things.
They're not the horrible things. I'm not overly worried about that, but I do think there are concerns that... And my biggest concern about all of this is the bill's about 200 pages long. I did a search, and there is on 100...
Do AI?
No, that's gone. But I did a page for the word Secretary of State. Now, there's something called the King Henry VIII Clause, which basically means in our law, you can put in our law, if the Secretary of State wants, they can do something different. Okay? So these recognized legitimate interests, these compatible secondary purposes, they have things in it that basically says, and the Secretary of State can add to this list.
Without parliamentary involvement.
Exactly. Without going through the same level of scrutiny as this law would do, you've now got the Secretary of State put in a position where they can write, and the Secretary of State, by the way, could be a number of different Secretary of States for a number of different government departments. There is the Secretary of State for a number of different departments. And so you've now got the ability for the Secretary of State to be able to add to this list without going through the same level of scrutiny. And I think that, for me, is the biggest concern all the way through this law. Because as I can see it in nearly every paragraph, it says almost afterwards, the Secretary of State can do something different. It's there in international transfers. It says, the Secretary of State can, by means of an order, right? It's there in the definition of scientific research. The Secretary of State can declare that it's different by writing an order. So we're seeing a lot of that sort of language through the law.
Sorry, Ralph, just on that point, because if somebody wouldn't agree, would they be able to go to court and escalate that to the European Court of Human Rights? Or is this just something that cannot be fought in court?
For the moment, we're still in the ECHR.
True that, but also the ECHR has, of course, certain boundaries that need to be respected. So it doesn't mean that the Secretary of State could go completely bonkers.
No, you couldn't escalate to the CJEU because we're not in Europe anymore. But what's interesting is our Human Rights Act 98, which is when our right to privacy kicks in under the ECHR, is only with the public sector, of course. So technically, the Secretary of State could do something in the law that would exempt someone in the private sector, and then we wouldn't be able to challenge it under the ECHR because the ECHR is really about state surveillance. Yeah. And it's really about privacy again, rather than, remember, you have to remember in the ECHR, there is no fundamental right of data protection, only a fundamental right of privacy.
And the Convention 108 and 108 Plus, there is.
Agreed. Yeah. But again, the UK, there's still these rumours in the UK. There's still these, can we soften the ECHR? Can we? The final one, perhaps, is the final two. So we've got a new definition of scientific research. Processing for the purposes of any research that can be reasonably be described as scientific, whether public or privately funded, and whether carried out as a commercial or non-commercial activity.
So a straw poll on the marketplace.
I'm a big believer in sharing data for scientific purposes. And I think that is one thing that has really hampered advancement in medical cures and treatments, is the fact that we often can't share data because you have to get certain types of specific permission and they can't last forever. But this sounds like it almost overcorrected the wrong direction.
Processing for the purposes of any research that can be reasonably described as scientific.
Reasonably. I love that word, reasonably.
So, off to the courts again. And the last one, and of course the biggest one, is we won't have an ICO anymore. The Information Commissioner's Office, at the moment, the ICO is, all the power is invested in John Edwards, the ICO himself, and he delegates that power throughout his office. It is a non-departmental public body. But the ICO is going to be replaced by the IC, the Information Commission. I'm sure they'll go for IC, not IC.
IC as in intensive care.
Yeah. So will henceforth be known as the Information Commission, changed to give the regulator a more modern structure. So the idea is there will be a board and a chief executive of that board rather than a single ICO. That will then be selected by the government. So there are some questions around an independent supervisory authority, potentially, to be concerned. Now, I've seen the great Eduardo Estevan put out a load of messaging already saying, we had an away day on this, we looked at it, there was nothing to threaten UK adequacy in here. And politically, I actually don't think the EU Commission would be too concerned, because politically they would want the UK to still be adequate. But I just wonder whether this is a death by 1,000 small cuts here, whether there is enough track changes to grease the wheels in favour of business, whether we are going to see a change in the independence of the IC.
The independence of the IC, really?
Whether there is going to be where individuals are going to be frustrated in doing their complaints, whether data subject access rights are going to be given less because of a reasonable and proportional search, whether data use is going to be encouraged because of these recognized legitimate interests and secondary compatible processing, adequacy decisions making easier, automated decisions becoming easier. Great for business as a sum, as a package. But I would just wonder whether it's death by 1,000 small cuts, whether there's a sort of an additive effect by doing all of this. And the message to business is clear. The message to business is, if you're in the UK, we will support you as a business in your use of data. If you're an individual, I don't think that that same strength of message is there.
Now, let's not forget on adequacy that the board already had concerns previously, of course, because of the intelligence structure in the UK and the wide range of access to personal data that MI5, MI6, and GCHQ have. So also there, this piles on. So I agree. I don't expect politically that this will be a withdrawal of adequacy, but it is becoming more difficult and more difficult a discussion. So curious to see what the European Data Protection Board will do.
Yes, indeed. And we can add to that the other news article that I sent you today was about the police services here in the UK entering into partnership with Palantir, using an AI-powered crime-fighting software. And it's been very vague about what this is, but essentially you are connecting together 80 databases that used to be separate, including a lot of special category data, handing it to Palantir, who will do some AI magic on it, and that will tell you who's about to commit crime.
Oh, God, I'm happy that the EU AI Act has entered into force with its prohibitions, at least, because this would be prohibited in the European Union.
Exactly. Palantir are denying that it's predictive policing.
Of course they are. They're denying any wrongdoing.
Yeah, but it is a slippery slope, as you say, and I do wonder whether the UK is in its rush to adopt AI, in its rush to make things easier for business here and take advantage of the economy in a post-EU relationship, whether that will sadly result in erosions for the rights and freedoms of individuals. And I think that's where I stand, sadly. And which, I mean, it's not as bad as the previous law. That's my saving grace. It's not as bad as DPDI was, but it certainly doesn't send out the right message in my eyes.
Okay, let's turn eyes to the US a little bit, because among all the warmongering, apparently your president has also seen fit to once again extend the prohibition for TikTok to operate in the US by 90 days. How many times do you think we will see that 90-day extension? Will that just last until the end of his presidency?
You know, he doesn't give a deadline in there. He just says it's now extended again. And we know that previously he had wanted TikTok banned before everybody else wanted TikTok banned. So now he's a big proponent of TikTok does not need to be banned. And he's extended it for I think this is the third time that he's extended it. He says he wants to keep them up and running. And apparently the administration will continue to work on extending the timeframes until such time as it is not required to be extended. And I'm not quite sure what considerations. I'm struggling for the right words here because I just want to say this is stupid. This is inane. This is absolutely ridiculous. But can he legally do it or not? Congress is the one that passed the order. How does an executive get to say, oh, no, they don't have to? It goes back to the actual power that is being used here as opposed to the power permitted under our Constitution.
We need to get our constitutional lawyer back. Nearly every action that man's done appears to have been does he have the power to do it or not? But he only seems to be worried about that after it's been done. That's kind of...
No, even then he is not, because then he ignores the lawyer, the courts, or says that the judge needs to go and be removed from office.
So it seems to mean nothing to him do it. But I'll be fair, when we first talked about Congress passing a law to force TikTok to sell, I'm not sure that I thought, well, let me scratch that, take that out. At the time, I was saying, I'm not sure that we have the ability to tell a company they have to sell unless it's like a monopoly or something that, is already against. And of course, what they cite are the national security reasons. If it was national security reasons, there are other actions you can take rather than passing a law forcing a company to sell. So I'm not sure I was really on the bandwagon saying they have to sell, but the law passed.
That's the point, right? I also think I agreed with you last year that this is a very strange law to pass because America would be the one screaming murder as the very first one when the European Union would adopt a law saying that Google or Meta or whoever has to divest their shares and go for European ownership. So the other way, and also there we could easily cite national security issues with even more evidence than U.S. Congress has ever had.
And our Supreme Court upheld the law based on the cited concerns of national security, which that could have gone either way. Flip a coin. I wasn't sure which way the Supreme Court was going to come down on that. But apparently, if the executive arm of the government says, oh, don't worry about it, you get another 90 days extension, who's actually going to enforce that?
Talking about big tech, also Meta has some issues this way. Do you remember when Meta acquired WhatsApp and there was a whole discussion about whether they would obtain too big a market share and they had to make all kinds of promises to the competition authorities? And they honestly stated and vouched that WhatsApp would never be part of Meta's advertising system, ever.
That's what they said.
That's what ended this week. As of soon, WhatsApp will also include advertisement, not in between your chats, at least not yet, but on the status update page, all kinds of advertising will be added.
And I don't use WhatsApp, so it sounds like they're trying to excuse how they're doing this, that it's on the updates tab, not just shown to everyone. So someone who uses WhatsApp may have to actually talk to me about what this actually means, but it sounds to me like Meta is pushing out ads to WhatsApp.
It's basically like your Instagram stories.
Will it drive people, do you think, to other things like Signal and Threema and Telegram? Which, in fact, I saw some stuff on Blue Sky today where the founders of Signal were saying, we'll never do this,
Yeah.
But so do you think it'll drive people, or do you think the WhatsApp critical mass is so much now that people will just put up and shut up?
Is it really social media?
We also have a small update on Pay or OK, because NOIB has decided to take 2 data protection authorities to court because they still haven't decided on complaints that NOIB filed in August of 2021 in Germany. So now the data protection authorities of North Rhine-Westphalia and Hesse have been taken to court because NOIB considers that they are inactive and that they should have been able to take all kinds of decisions already. I don't know. I can't see behind the scenes in what is happening at those data protection offices, given that it's Meta. It's likely there is a lot of international cooperation also taking place.
Yeah.
But 4 years is also a long time to wait. And
it
not
really
necessarily
is.
for a NOIB, but for an individual, 4 years is a long time.
And point of trivia, the land of Hesse was the first one to ever pass the world's first data protection or privacy law.
Yes.
Yes, indeed. And didn't they actually publish basically a paper saying we're pausing, or these are the reasons why we're not progressing the investigation at the speed that we should do? And I think it was
North Rhine-Westphalia did.
Yeah, and I think it was that paper that then NOIB is responding to by saying we're going to take you to court.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah, indeed. And to wrap up, because we're already well over time, apologies for that, but there is too much to discuss this week. We have another celebration, and congratulations are in order for Alexander White, who has been appointed as the new privacy commissioner, or information commissioner, I should say, in Queensland, Australia. So Australia is busy appointing people. Last week, Annelies Munz. This week, Alexander White.
Yeah, I'll always remember Alexander for the GPA for being very proud of wearing his Bermuda shorts to speak of the culture of his people. So perhaps he's swapping Bermuda shorts for cork hats. Who knows?
But let's not forget one critical point. He was apparently the chief privacy officer for South Carolina.
There you go.
At some point in his history. I'll have to pick that much up. I may be completely wrong. It might have been an agency in South Carolina or something else. But I did not know of all the times that he and I have met and spoken that we had this South Carolina connection. So that was pretty cool.
There you go. Yes, that also means that there is a vacancy coming up as privacy commissioner in Bermuda.
I could rock some shorts.
Yeah, you'd go for the weather. Mind you saying that, it's pretty hot here all the same.
Either one of y'all could rock the shorts too, I'm just saying.
Yeah, for me, it's a bit too remote from friends and family, so I'll stay put. But
my friends and family may wish me to go somewhere else.
Well, I'm not sure what the hurricane status for Bermuda is, but okay. On that happy note, see you next week.
That was Serious Privacy.
This wraps up our podcast for this week. Please do share the episode with your friends and colleagues because we love to get more listeners. And join the conversation on LinkedIn or on Blue Sky. You'll find us under Serious Privacy on both platforms. You'll find Kay as Heart of Privacy, Ralph as IGR O'Brien, and myself as Europol B. Until next week, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, y'all.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No. That's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data, and get credible, cited answers based on Nimity research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, Quick Actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.